On today's episode of the Milk Making Minutes, we hear a story of someone who went from feeling discouraged and constantly anxious about milk supply to feeling empowered to express milk using just her hands and producing an abundance of milk. You will hear a journey from feeling like she couldn't be enough to knowing she most definitely is enough and giving that message to others. There is a brief reference to infant loss in this episode, so please take care of yourself. If you aren't ready to hear a story that mentions that topic, come back to hearing this empowering story with Francie when you feel ready. As you listen, think about your own milk-making journey. What would have helped you feel like you were enough? If you are someone who works with people during lactation, what do you do to help them feel like they are enough? Enjoy this empowering story. When I began breastfeeding, I was blindsided by how difficult it was. I may have thought I was prepared, but having known only a handful of people who had ever breastfed and only seeing it up close from a couple of them, I had a huge learning curve. Since then, I've become a doula, a lactation consultant, and a childbirth educator. I'm your host, Lo Nigrosh, and I welcome you to the Milk Making Minutes, where we explore breastfeeding experiences through the lens of systemic barriers, so that you know your breastfeeding struggles are not your fault and your triumphs really are the miracles you feel they are. Hi, Francie. Welcome to the Milk Making Minutes. I'm so glad you're here.
We're going to have the breast time, Lo.
So funny. Okay.
I always have to.
Yes. So before we get into your story, I would love for you to take a minute to introduce yourself.
I'd love to. My name is Francie Webb. I have 3 kids, and I've done this really wild thing with each of them called feeding them with my body. Just like still mind-blowing that that's a thing. And I also work in the lactation world now. I run a company called Go Milk Yourself, and we support people with feeding their baby, and are really out to empower the planet with making feeding babies something of ease, which it often isn't. I'm married to a wonderful man. His name is Leo. We are approaching our 11th wedding anniversary. We have a cat and a dog and a house with a pool. We are recent transplants to Virginia from almost 2 decades in New York City.
Whoa.
And I eat the same omelet for breakfast every single morning, and it makes me so happy.
Wow.
That's about me.
Okay, awesome. That's some great stuff. And we'll definitely link to Go Milk Yourself in the show notes, because helping people feed their babies with ease is so important. As mammals, it should be that it happens with ease, and it doesn't.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
So before we hear exactly how it happened for you, what was your exposure to baby feeding, body feeding, breastfeeding before you were doing it yourself?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked, because this is one of my favorite stories, because a lot began for me in this moment. I went to a newborn care class at my hospital when I was pregnant with my first baby. I did not know many people who had breastfed at that time. I distinctly remember bottle feeding my youngest sisters, who are twins, who are, by the way, they were born on my 10th birthday. So I was like 10 plus maybe 2 or 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember them both sitting on my lap and me feeding them with 2 bottles, like on my forearm, using the forearm to hold both bottles at the same time. Bottles of formula when they had just arrived home from the hospital. So come to think of it, it probably wasn't me. It was probably my mom. And I've put myself in her position in the memory.
Yeah.
I did help out, but I didn't ever see my mom breastfeed. I don't remember if I ever saw anybody breastfeed.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. And then each of my sisters had a baby before me and had different experiences with breastfeeding. I don't know if I ever saw either of them nurse their babies, to be honest. I don't really have any memories of anything related to breastfeeding. I had helped many, many babies eat with a bottle as a babysitter and aunt and, supporter. I was always one holding babies and maybe feeding them a bottle. But I go to this newborn care class that my hospital is hosting. my doctor said, sign up for these 3 classes. So I did. And I asked a bunch of questions about like pumping when I went back to work. Cause I really wanted to have milk for my baby when I went back. And the short of it is the woman instructing the class pulled me aside afterward and said, do not take this hospital's breastfeeding class. And I'm like, really? It turns out she's a brilliant lactation consultant on Long Island named Ina Bransom. She's still practicing. Her daughter is also a lactation consultant and she is getting up in her years and she's just incredible. And she said she happened to be the one teaching that hospital class. And she said, do not go to this hospital's breastfeeding class. They're going to tell you that there's a right way to do it and you need a special pillow. I'll never forget those words. And she said, instead, I want you to go to the prenatal yoga center on the Upper West Side and take Andrea Sims Brown's breastfeeding class. And I was like, okay. And I signed up for it and I went to the class and I walked out of there like, holy moly, I feel like I can actually do this with my body. And I feel like, it's going to work. And I know exactly who to call if it doesn't. And that shifted everything for me. And so by the time my baby was born, it was kind of like, okay, I learned so much in that class about how it works and what I need to do to get it working. And if it does not work, then I know this person who's apparently a magical unicorn or, to me, she seemed magic, honestly. Like she knew something that nobody else did. And she was going to be my go-to person if I needed support.
Yeah. So many people tell me the breastfeeding class was a waste of time.
Yeah.
And we, as lactation supporters, know that prenatal education can make a difference, but we know it has to be the right prenatal education. So as a person who was told, don't go to this class because you're going to learn that it has to be done, this way and you need a certain pillow.
Right.
But then you went to another class.
Right.
What exactly was told to you in that class that made you walk out of there thinking, I can do it, instead of walking out of there thinking, oh my gosh, there's so much to this? Because I just had another interview like a few days ago where someone said they walked out of the class feeling like, there's so much to learn. I don't know if I can do this.
Totally. First of all, it was Andrea's. She's now been my mentor for almost 10 years. So we have a very close relationship. As I work towards becoming an international board certified lactation consultant, she has been my guide. The first thing was like, this wonderful human being is going to be there for me if I need her to be there for me. Like, there's just no doubt in my mind, this is my go-to. And then the other piece was so very practical. One of the things, I don't know if she still does this in her class. It's on Zoom now. But we took balloons and blew them up and tied them and then made a sandwich with them with our hands. And I can't remember if she demonstrated this or we all did, but it was like, put on some lipstick and without squeezing the balloon, see what happens with your mouth when you try to put it on like the teat, if you will, like the balloon tie. And now squish it like a sandwich and do the same thing. And you could see that you could get more in your mouth when it was sandwiched. So that's just the perfect example of like, here's a quick trick for making it work when it seemed like there's no way it would, or when you had no idea. So I walked out of there being like, well, I can do X and it will make a difference in this one way. And I can do Y and it will make a difference in another way. And if I'm having pain, I can try this little tweak to this position and I can avoid this other position. It just was so practical.
Yeah.
And everything was in line with like biology and baby's reflexes. Like, if we want the baby to be able to attach, how can we optimize the chances the baby will? And so I knew that my job was to simply put those tips and tools in to optimize.
Right. So it was all about paying attention to the baby reflexes, and then how is your baby responding to what you're doing? Yeah. Yeah.
There's a lot about like trusting this new little human who's coming out, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. So if you're walking out of a breastfeeding class and you're feeling like, oh my gosh, it's too much, I can't do it, then maybe just like forget everything you learned and like, find somebody who's going to help you feel like, I can't do this.
Yeah. I mean, I have a huge bias now. I send 100% of the people I work with and or talk to, I send them to Andrea's class. I'm like, just go take this class, go take this class, go take.
And she does it on Zoom now.
That's right. It's funded by a grant.
Oh my gosh, we will definitely link her class in the show notes. That's amazing.
It definitely fills up.
Yes, I bet. Okay. Yeah. So you took this class prenatally. And so then did you set any goals for yourself?
Yeah, I had it throughout my pregnancy. I was pregnant at the same time as a close friend of mine. Our kids were born about 2 months apart, and she had dedicated her pregnancy. She wasn't working at the time. In short, her job was to prepare for a baby. Like that was the situation that she was in. And so I just believed everything that she told me. And she was like, I remember walking next to her on the streets of New York while we're both pregnant and saying, I'm like, I know I want to go for a year, but maybe I want to go for 2 years, like you say is best. Cause she'd been reading all kinds of recommendations. And she was like, Francie, you should feed your baby for as long as you and your baby want to do it, instead of like, that's exactly what I'm saying to do. But I was kind of like, well, she knows things that I don't. And I was teaching middle school and too busy to prepare in many ways. And also I was on bed rest for a baby measuring small for a good chunk of the pregnancy too. So I was nervous about that. I was just like, is my baby okay? Is my baby okay? Was my big thing. So my friend was a huge influence on me. And I had goals because of what my friend said. I was like, well, I'm just going to do what Rose does because she's smart and her kid's going to be in great shape. So I'm just going to follow her lead. So I had this idea that I would go for a year for sure, but ideally I would nurse for 2 years if possible.
Okay, cool. All right. So was there anything about the birth or births? I know you have 3 stories, so you can talk about them as makes sense, either chronologically or as
Sure.
you view them in your own brain, as you compare your stories. Was there
Yes.
anything that happened in the births that impacted breastfeeding for you?
When I asked Francie if there was anything about her births that impacted her breastfeeding experiences, she mentioned having very supportive conversations with providers in her practice and immediate skin to skin contact with all 3 unmedicated physiological births. She was worried about getting an epidural and did not want to be induced because she knew the likelihood of that leading to pain medication. As you listen to her provider's response, think about conversations you had with your provider. Did they empower you to feel confident in your body's ability to birth? Did the content you consume help you feel confident? All of these can have an impact on breastfeeding. Conversations we have with providers, with friends, and with family, things we read, and content we consume on social media. Let's get picky, shall we?
And I just had like really great and supportive conversations with one of the doctors in my practice about it. I was just like, look, you guys might induce me, but I'd really prefer not to have an epidural. And I'm concerned that if you give me Pitocin, I won't be able to go medication free. And she was like, people have babies without epidurals all over the world every single day, with and without Pitocin. And if you feel very, very strongly about not having an epidural, you can do it.
Amazing. Amazing that was the response from your doctor.
I know. I know. And she happened to be the one at my birth. And that was the only time I ever met her. And she told me exactly that. And I was like, damn. And then she happened to be there and I had a really cool experience. I was insistent on having a doula because I was very scared about being emotionally triggered if anything went wrong with my baby during the birth and I needed somebody to talk me down. And that's because when I was 14 years old, I was babysitting for a baby girl and I put her to sleep and she died of SIDS. She was 11 weeks old and her parents were just out at their friend's wedding and I was the first person they'd ever left her with. And she just stopped breathing after I put her to sleep, which was like a seminal experience in my life. It was obviously quite traumatizing. Yeah. And like many, many years of all kinds of support to process it. I like avoided it for a long time, then went to therapy over a period of time and then reunited with the family who had moved away shortly thereafter. And like we hadn't been in much touch for a while there. And so I was always scared of there's something wrong with my baby. There's going to be something wrong with my baby, or I'm going to think there's something wrong with my baby and I'm going to lose it.
Yeah.
Like I'm not going to be able to handle anything less than positive news about my baby.
Oh my goodness. What a thing for a 14-year-old to experience.
Right. And so like I remember having a conversation with my OB and saying, I need to talk about how you all deliver information to me during the birthing process because we've already got a baby who's measuring small. You say she's probably fine, but it's very triggering for me that something might be wrong with my baby. But during the birthing process, I just want to make sure that like I don't completely freak out and like I don't even know what I thought would happen physiologically if they gave me bad news, but I just thought I would kind of have some kind of meltdown about it. And then that would interrupt the process or hurt the baby. I'm not even sure what I thought.
Yeah. I mean, stress definitely plays a role.
Yeah. And it was like, who's going to help comfort me and support me if I am triggered by baby is less than perfect, even in this moment, this 1 nanosecond, And my doctor, she was great. She was like, she said, I actually think, she said, I'm totally here to support you in that. But I also want you to talk to the pediatrician you choose, because what we don't want is this becoming a major postpartum issue where you're staring at your baby for 30 hours in a row to be sure that baby is breathing. And then you have like postpartum anxiety, depression, possible psychosis. Like that's when things get really bad, is when you just are, the worry means you never sleep. So I hired a doula to help me, with my heart and my mind.
Francie also explained that she had recently recovered from a surgery before becoming pregnant and wanted to do everything in her power to avoid another major surgery so soon. So she also discussed her strong desire to deliver vaginally with her providers. And this was another reason to hire a doula. She told me she was obsessed with delivering on hands and knees. Her provider tried at first to get her to deliver on her back, but then quickly changed course. This is what happened.
Damn it, she was trying to get me to stay on my back, But I tried a little bit. I tried like pushing just a tiny bit on my back. And I was immediately like, nope, we're not doing this. We're not doing this. I was like, I got to get on my hands and knees. I got to get on my hands and knees. And she said, okay, if you're going to get on your hands and knees, then what I ask is that she said, I want you to kind of curve your back like you're in cat position. And then I want you to kind of come back almost as if you're in child's pose. And I'm like, dude, this doctor who I only met that one time is speaking yoga to me. And she doesn't even know that like I love yoga. The childbirth prep class that I took was all yoga based. And I'm like, I'll do whatever she says. I'll get in cat position. I'll come back to her child's pose. And 17 minutes later, I'm holding my baby girl.
Yeah.
All of that. It's like people have different things that they're out to get or out to avoid in their births. All of that was so I did not have to have surgery again after just having had surgery.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so then you had that immediate postpartum skin to skin.
Yeah. And then our doula helped us latch the baby, and she was latched pretty soon. I'll never forget, there was like this really sweet picture of her nursing and my husband and me. And I mean, I just look like elated. Like it's that like, oh my gosh, you don't even look like you had a baby. Like all the dumb stuff people say. But it's like, I looked like I was on top of the world because I felt on top of the freaking world in that moment.
Yeah.
And there's this great picture of Leo and me with the baby nursing. And I posted it as my Facebook profile picture. And people started liking it, commenting on it. And then someone I went to high school with messaged me and was like, your nipples in your picture. And I was like, what picture? Because I posted a bunch of pictures. She's like, your profile picture. And I go back and look at that picture. And there is my like almost black areola, like straight up right there on my Facebook profile picture. And I just hadn't even been aware of it. And now I'd probably just keep it up there. But like back in 2012, it was like, oh my God. And I had someone Photoshop it right away for me. But but like breastfeeding with my first started out beautifully. It really did. And things only got stressful and went wonky when I needed to start pumping to go back to work. And I was extremely stressed about that. And by the way, we got bed bugs. We had bed bugs with our newborn in our apartment in New York City. And so like pumping became even more stressful when we could not stay in our apartment and we're instead trying to find where like we stayed. I remember one week we stayed in 5 different places.
Oh my goodness.
Just trying to find a safe place to stay because we had bugs in our apartment that bit my baby all over her body. After the landlord told me the bugs are gone, there are no more bugs.
Oh my
So
gosh.
things got extremely stressful when it was time for me to go back to work.
So how old was baby when you were dealing with the bed bugs?
We actually realized later that we saw the first bug. My sister was visiting her like, do you think that's a bed bug? And I was like, and I looked it up. I was like, no, it's definitely not a bed bug. It's not brown enough. It was kind of clearish. But it turns out that's what they're like when they're younger. They get darker as they get older. So we saw the first bed bug when she was a few days old. My sisters were visiting when she was like 5 or 6 days old.
Oh my goodness.
We didn't realize we had bed bugs until 6 weeks. Which was like a long time, and they multiplied and it was terrible. And I kept telling the pediatrician, she keeps getting this rash. And I was like, whatever, I get bit by mosquitoes all the time. No big deal. I'm sure it's mosquitoes. But like the rash that I kept trying to solve was actually her being bitten by bed bugs that were first only in her bed and then were in ours. And the situation was not resolved until she was 6 months old. It was like a long time fight with the landlord over, 3.5 months. And during that time, I went back to work, which was extremely stressful.
Yeah. So what was so stressful about pumping once you went back to work? What made that so hard?
Well, I thought I could just pump every time my baby ate and I would get the exact amount that she ate in a bottle and I would bring
That's
it
standard
home.
advice, isn't it?
Yeah, right? And I would bring her home and I would bring the milk home and give it to her for the next day. And then if I wanted to get a little extra, I could just like pump once more before bedtime and start building a stash. But I had intended to have some milk stash for going back to work, but we had the bed bug situation happening. Actually, we weren't allowed in our apartment for a chunk of time because we had filed a grievance saying like it was untenable, but I needed to go back and get my milk because it was in the freezer. And so I like went and begged the doorman and he was like, I won't tell anybody if you won't tell anybody, but be quick. And I like snuck into our apartment to get the ounces of milk that I'd saved for work. But basically I thought I'd have this stash, but instead we were like back and forth. So I was just nursing my baby and pumping was way too stressful. So I had 12 ounces the day I went back to work total. And she was also refusing a bottle at that time. She'd taken one earlier when we first practiced it, but then she was refusing it in the few weeks before work. And she ate all 12 ounces that first day. And I was sobbing by day 2. And at the end of day 2, I went to a breastfeeding store in Manhattan and just sat there and cried at their feet and was like, please help me, which they did. It was like, how on earth? I had no idea it was going to be an issue to keep up. I had no idea. I thought, she nursed throughout the day. So she would just go take that bottle. I would get that milk out. It was almost like it's that milk. It's like only, like milk sample A is available from 12 to 12:30 when she's normally nursing. And so A will come out from 12 to 12:30 and then B will come out from 3 to 3:30.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the picture. You get 2 pieces of advice. You get the piece of advice that says, start pumping the moment your baby is born and build up a humongous supply and stress yourself out because you're feeding a newborn and you're pumping on top of that.
Right.
But you have to do it immediately. Otherwise, you'll never have enough milk to go back to work. You get that. And then you also get that, nope, you don't need to do that. Just wait till you go back to work. And all you need to do is pump the same amount, pump
That's
every
right.
time your baby would feed. And then you will produce the milk you need for the next day. In theory, that's how it should work.
Well, and it's like a huge missing piece is to talk about how the different types of milk removal are different.
Right.
2012 Medela pumping style versus my very well latched baby's mouth.
Right.
Like literally apples and oranges night and day.
Right.
So that's why it was stressful. And it took me until I went back to work. I was a teacher and I went back to work in September. And by October 25th, I was on a plane to California with 17 extra bottles of milk. I would not freeze in bags. I was so anxious about its supply. I froze straight in the Medela bottles. And I kept asking for more bottles from people in my neighborhood because I was so scared of losing a single drop of milk, transferring it to a bag. But I have this like big cooler bag on my shoulder as I fly to California with my baby. And she is almost 5.5 months old. And I'll never forget, I had 17 bottles of milk for her to take while I was away from her for 2 nights at a yoga retreat. And I remember saying to my husband, I don't know if I'm prouder of this human I created or this milk in this cooler bag.
Oh my gosh. That's something.
I was really proud. And it was from taking the advice of the people at the breastfeeding store and trying a bunch of things. And the biggest thing that worked for me, because I also got a hospital grade pump and took supplements, blah, blah, blah. But the biggest thing was I started hand expressing. Shocking. I started hand expressing after my pumping sessions and then a couple times hand express without pumping and was like, wow, I can just get bonus milk. This is so cool. There's more where that came from. And so I would just like get the bonus milk and save the bonus milk. And when our nanny, who we were sharing, we had a nanny share with another family. And she asked me if I could start leaving 16 ounces a day instead of the 11 to 12 that I was leaving for the 9 hours I was away. And I said no. And I was really proud of myself. I was like, no, there's no way I can leave you 16 ounces. And she's like, well, the other baby's typically taking about that much and are the same age. The other baby was taking primarily formula a while away. So it was just like, oh, give him a little more. No big deal. And I just said to her, like, that's not possible. And I would prefer not to use formula. She asked if I was open to that. And I actually felt a little like sneaky that I was getting this bonus milk and putting it in the freezer instead of giving it to her because she'd asked for it. But I'm like, we just need to find other ways to soothe her and like slow down how she's eating or whatever. And so there I am with those ounces of milk. And the cutest part of it is I leave my pump parts at home in New York on this flight to California. Right before I left, what I did was pumped. And I left my tubes and the cord to my pump on my dining table. And I'm just driving away from baby to the yoga retreat with my friend when I realize I have no way to pump. I can't pump. I don't even have the tubes. Like I cannot connect to my own pump that I so carefully packed in my suitcase. I'd packed everything so perfectly and left just the amount of space to like pop my pump in there right before closing it and walking.
Oh my goodness.
And I forgot the parts and there was no way to get them. So that was the weekend that I learned to hand express. And in my first 24 hours away from baby, I expressed 29 ounces of milk with just my hands and didn't go back to the pump after that. But the discovery for me, like the reason, so my first baby who just recently turned 10 nursed. It's so funny. Someone's like, how many months is your kid? I saw a funny reel the other day that was like, my kid is 120 months. How many months is your kid? But when I think about it, she nursed for 32 months. And I think about it that way because I thought it was such a feat to get through like the first month and then the second month and then 6 months. And then suddenly she's a 13-monther. And I kind of had to scale back. Like I was still hand expressing like a fiend when she was like almost 2. And I was texting my friend, the one who I'd been pregnant at the same time with. And she was like, Francie, you do not need to be expressing this milk for her anymore. Because I was like, my supply is lower. I'm still hand expressing the word, but my supply is lower and I don't know what to do. She's like, Francie, your kid is like 16 months old. Why are you driving yourself crazy? You don't even need to be doing this anymore. And I was like, really? I had no idea.
Right.
So I was really anxious about milk supply and hand expression helped me with that. And then I went a little too far with it sometimes, just feeling like it ruled me. But she nursed until the day she was 4 months shy of age 3. And I'm starting to think we'd probably tandem nurse because I was almost 7 months pregnant at the time with our second. And nursing had been painful at the beginning of the pregnancy. But then once the hormones shifted, things were okay. But she looked at me one day, or 2.5 months before her sister was born. She looked at me one day and she said, Mommy, I'm all done with that.
Wow.
Just like that. And I remember she had an ear infection and she hadn't nursed for like a day or two. And then she woke up and like the fever was back and her ears were hurting her. And I was thinking maybe this would help. So I brought her to breast. And I said, do you want to nurse? And she's kind of like, okay. And then she got on and she sucked for like a few seconds. Then she looked right up at me and said, Mommy, I'm all done with that.
Yeah.
And I later learned, Andrea later suggested to me that that may have been when my colostrum came in for baby 2. And it might have been salty. And she was like, why is this suddenly salty? It was sweet before.
Yeah.
So that's, we had a real success story and I felt great about how things went. Like I met my goals, and that was important at the time. And it was because when something wasn't working, I asked for help and I would sneak out. I think I only faked a doctor's appointment once. I think every other time I did it was legit that I could go. But like one time was like, I need to go to the doctor when really I just wanted to go to Andrea's breastfeeding support group. And the whole time I was on maternity leave, I went every single time to a breastfeeding support group. And then when I went back to work, if there was an issue, I would go. So I always had Andrea. And I actually got a bunch of other moms together who like weren't available during weekday daytimes. And we had her do like a custom support group for us a few times as well.
Yeah. Before we were like a nuclear family, just living in our homes with just, 1 or 2 parents and their children. Breastfeeding was done in these wide open groups with lots of parents. So you might not necessarily talk about breastfeeding, but you would see it and you would see how other typically mothers were breastfeeding their babies, and adjusting their breasts and adjusting their baby and holding the baby this way and moving the baby that way while they were doing other things as well. Right. And I have found that very many people who I talk to who are like, I struggled a lot, but I found my way. Often they attended some sort of group with other people.
Makes such a big difference.
It made such a big difference. Even if you don't know why you're going. I went for a long time and sometimes I had nothing in particular to talk about.
Yeah, that's
But
right.
I would go.
Well, I should at least do something outside the house, you know?
I know. I would go, and then somebody else would bring something up, and I'd be like,
Yep.
"Oh yeah, I had that question last week. I forgot about it." You know?
That's right. Yeah. And we would go out for drinks after too. We would go have margaritas or wine or something after too.
Yeah, so important. So important to build that
Yeah.
support.
Do you love to read about pregnancy, childbirth, and breastfeeding? Are you looking for books to help you become a more confident parent? Or perhaps books to help you understand what went wrong with your breastfeeding journey or to do better next time with breastfeeding? Or do your kids have questions about breastfeeding or pregnancy, but you don't really know how to answer them? Would you prefer to have a curated list on these topics? Go to the link in the show notes to my new affiliated bookshop. Every purchase you make benefits the Milk Making Minutes. But better than that, these books are vetted. I've read them all, and I feel very confident recommending them to you. I'll be adding to them continuously, so go to that link when you want to purchase a book. It will help the show, and you can feel confident it will be a purchase you will enjoy.
Do you mind talking a little bit more about how you made hand expressions successful? Because we know, I mean, there is now so much scientific evidence about what hand expression can do for milk supply, but
Yes.
we don't have to have the scientific evidence to know that. Like people
That's
who
right.
can successfully hand express will say it does help their milk supply.
Sure.
But then, you'll tell that to people and people will say, well, I have a really hard time with hand expression. It's never
Totally.
worked.
I ran back to Andrea's support group the first day that I could go after I got back from that trip. And I said, Andrea, you will not believe it. I can get the milk out with my hand. It was almost like I thought no one's ever done this before. Like, you will not believe this thing. And Andrea goes, I do believe it. It's called hand expression. And I was like, oh my God, there's a name for it.
Yeah, people do this.
She said, it's called hand expression. But I have to say, I have never seen anyone so excited about it. And it changed my whole life because it was so much easier than pumping. I didn't have to clean all the parts. Very quickly, I became good enough at hand expression that I was getting the same or more as a hospital grade pump in less time. And it was like something clicked that I'm enough.
You don't need any extra stuff. You don't need to have a bunch of equipment. It can just be you and your body.
Yeah.
And guess what? If baby cries, you can just stop. There's nothing to take off.
That's right.
There's nothing to turn off.
Yeah. And it turned out like it was almost like completing a story about, there was some kind of story to be completed about, this baby died when I was a teenager, when I put her to sleep. And then something to complete about my body grew a baby that some people thought was too small and would require either a cesarean or an induction to resolve, and being on bed rest and that being really challenging because I felt like I couldn't live my life for a good chunk of the pregnancy. I just had to sit at home and worry about my baby. And then the not having enough in my stash when I went back to work during the bed bug situation. And then the not getting as much as I wanted from the pump. It was like all of that I could say was complete for me. And I could now choose how and when to get milk out of my body. My body was doing it. And not only doing it right, but doing it in this way that felt like a miracle or felt like way beyond expectation. So I started teaching hand expression workshops. My first was in August of 2016. And then I started doing full scale lactation support once COVID hit because it was so much needed. I mean, it's been almost 6 years. It'll be 6 years this month since the first hand expression workshop. And people come all the time who are like, I have no idea how to do this. And more I'm hearing back from people, look what I did, my very own hands. And it's so friggin' cool.
Oh,
and I mean, it's really, it's a process of discovery, but it doesn't work if you don't think it will. If you're really committed that it won't work for you, there's no way it will. That's a big thing. But as you know, lots of other components to how we get milk out and how well it will come out. And it tends to be that people who have oversupply can get milk out pretty easily in most ways, including their hands. And then people with very small amounts of supply will sometimes have a hard time getting anything out in hand expression or will get small amounts. But of the hundreds of people I've seen just literally with my own two eyes, not talking about people who follow or have watched videos, but like people I've worked with live, I've only met one person who was physiologically unable to hand express at all. And that was a person who had like pretty severe scar tissue and damage from a lot of breast infections.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Pretty amazing. I just had an interview last week with somebody who talked about body dysmorphia and feeling such disconnection to her body during breastfeeding, but also during pumping. And she said the sound of the pump will forever haunt her. And just feeling like an object during pumping and feeling like her body just, feeling, like a cow. And people joke about that. People joke.
Yeah, but that really lands for me. It really does. Like I was saying, it actually in our last hand expression workshop, I was saying, you guys, like some people really do think that there are a lot of people out there who will be like, the pump was speaking to me the same way that if you put like the Wizard of Oz album on backwards, it's going to play whatever it is,
She said there was a phrase that the pump said to her over and over again.
People will say that. And everyone in this workshop was like, really? People say that? And like pumps have also changed a lot since I used one, which was now 10 years ago. And I will say that I absolutely loathed being on the breast pump. And I actually realized that was planted earlier. I now remember that I raised my hand at Andrea's class and said, do I have to pump? Which is such a funny question. Like I have so many cool answers for that question now, but I was like, do I have to pump? And she said, well, do you have a need for expressed milk outside of, like your baby, like, is your baby going to be able to nurse all day basically? And I was like, no, I'm going to be back at work. And she's like, well, then yes, you'll need to pump. And I just remember being like, damn it, I have to put a machine on my nipples. I hated it. I really hated the experience of it, everything about it. And the biggest thing for me was the emotional piece. I was like, this is a constant reminder that I am not enough and will never be enough. That's what it felt like to me. By the way, I probably should have used smaller flanges. And
yes, I know.
All these things, right? And a better vote.
Yeah. From home.
Yeah. And it's interesting because like looking back on it, so my third baby is now recently turned 2. And we've been going through a weird little nursing thing where like for various reasons, partly due to travel and partly due to sleep regression, we upped our nursing a lot, including some night nursing, which we had not been doing in a really long time. And weaning from that has been very, very difficult. I think we're finally past the point. But like basically we slept together in a bed, just the two of us in an apartment in New York City for 3.5 weeks while I was there for work in June. And just turned into a total disaster when we got home. Because she's like, what do you mean I don't get boob at night? And I'm like, no, we haven't had boob at night since you were 6 months old. Like this is... So that's been a challenge. And it's fascinating what's happened with my boobs. Like I went to a client's birth one night as their doula while in New York City. And from just one day of nursing the baby throughout the day, daycare was closed one day in New York. I didn't know this. And so I nursed her to get through my client visits that day. And then we nursed some at night that Monday night, some at night that Tuesday night. And then I left for a birth. And Wednesday night, I came back from the birth and she was staying with a friend. And it had been about 24 hours since I nursed her. And I woke up in the middle of the night to rock hard boobs. And I'm like, you're kidding me at age 2. And it was just from accelerating the nursing over that several days. Wow. So we've been adjusting from there. But besides that, I mean, the third journey is fascinating. But basically, I went through a lot of pain in the first 4 weeks that were because she was clamping to manage a very fast letdown from lactating for the third time. But other than that, I would say with my third baby has been the first time that I will say that I have actually enjoyed the nursing experience this time, which actually feels a little hard to say because the last 2 months have been really challenging and I've had some major emotions about it. But with my second child nursed until she was just 4 weeks shy of 5 years old. And that was like, that's a whole journey. But like, it was interesting for me to look at a certain point with my third and be like, this is the first time I kind of enjoy when she comes to nurse. I'm like, this is sweet and lovely. And I'm like, that's interesting. I nursed that other kid for almost half a decade and never had that moment of like, but I guess what's interesting about the 3 journeys looking back at them is that if I hadn't gotten the support and the teamwork that I got with the first journey, there's just no way I would have had the options that I've had.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so important. I think that gets named again and again that people can do it with little support, but man, it's so harder. Well, Francie, thank you so much for taking the time to share your stories. I think hearing your journey to how you became the hand expression guru that you are is pretty amazing. So thank you so much for coming and sharing your stories.
Thank you. It's been an absolute honor to be here. And it's really cool for me to have the opportunity to look at like how I became somebody so very badly in need of support and now get to do that for other people. It's really, I don't have the words. It's definitely, I'm super grateful for it. And I'm super grateful for your time. And it's really fun to be with you. Thanks.
Awesome.
Now go milk yourself. Hello.
I'm done milking myself.
That's right.
I'm so grateful to Francie for sharing her story of a changed view of her ability to make milk and of the work she does to empower others. If you are a lactation professional who counsels people on increasing milk supply, I would love for you to walk away from this episode thinking about the ways that you express your belief in a person's ability to make milk. Are you saying and doing things that add doubt? Or are you saying and doing things that empower people to believe in their body's ability to make and express milk? If you are curious to learn more from Francie about hand expression, tune in to the upcoming Quick Kit episode, which will drop on Thursday for some knowledge about hand expression. If you want to join a community of people talking about removing barriers to feeding babies human milk, join my growing Milk Making Minutes community group on Facebook. I'll see you there.